What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2008 W211 E63 AMG. Today, on the W211 behind me, we're going to be covering how to replace your lower control arms. In front of me, we have all the hardware and arms necessary to do this job, and to my left, you can see the old hardware that we're going to be pulling out. We recommend you do this every 80 to 100,000 miles. The vehicle behind us has 135,000 miles, so it's absolutely due for this service. All these parts are available on fcpeuro.com. And be sure to stay tuned for when we do the upper control arms, which will require the subframe to come down. Now, all the parts in front of me are genuine Mercedes, including the hardware. Both of them are available on fcpeuro.com. Some things to note when inspecting your lower control arms are the health of the bushings. As they age, they tend to crack and wear. Sometimes you'll get a squeak going over bumps, and in extreme circumstances, you'll have the vehicle feel like it's steering itself from the rear under hard acceleration. So make sure you look out for that before you tackle this DIY. Now, before we get started, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the tools we're going to need. And now for tools. For this job, we're going to have two different size torque wrench, both a 1/2 inch drive and a 3/8 drive. Same goes for our ratchets. We have a 1/2 inch and a 3/8, as well as an electric counterpart. We have a long flathead screwdriver. We have a couple adapters, both 3/8 and 1/2 inch for the tools that we're using. You're going to need a 17mm lug socket. We have an E12 and an E14. We have a 12mm and a 10mm socket. Our exhaust hardware is a little rusty. It should be a 13, but we're going to sell bars with a 12 and tap it on there. We have two different length M14s. We have a 10mm hex. We have a T55, as well as a couple swivel adapters. We have a 18mm wrench, a 21mm wrench, an electric impact, which will help with some of the big hardware, a little paint marker for when we torque everything up, and some liquid moly ceramic paste for some of our hardware. Now that we know what tools we're working with, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, today we're going to be working on the driver's side of the W211. However, the steps for the passenger side are going to be identical. So to get started, we're on the lift. We're going to go ahead and take our wheel off. We have 5 17mm lug bolts to take off, so we'll grab our 17mm socket, our impact gun, and zap them off. All right, now we have our wheel off. We're going to work with our rearward-most arm first. So we're going to go ahead and lift up the car a little bit more. We'll get underneath it and we'll give you a better view of how we can go about replacing this arm first. One thing to note, if you don't have one of these already, make sure you have a floor jack or a screw jack so you can lower and raise the suspension as we work. Let's get to it. All right, my good people, we are going to start at the back of the W211 with the rearward arm, starting with the wheel carrier side of things. We're going to use our 10mm hex on one end and our 18mm wrench on the other end to counter hold our nut. That's good there. We got our 10mm hex on our impact just to drive it out a little bit quicker. Okay, just be careful. The tension in the bushing will spring it up. Now with that done, we can go ahead and move inboard towards the subframe, and we have two more pieces of hardware to remove there, so let's go ahead and do that. Now moving inboard towards the subframe, we have an E14 that we're going to start with next. I have my E14 on a swivel adapter and a 5-inch extension. I'm going to feed that under the exhaust elbow. Make sure we got a good bite, and then we'll zap it off with our impact. Angle's a bit awkward, doesn't really like that. Now that we have broken that E14 loose, we're going to go ahead and switch over to just our ratchet with no extensions. We have some room to break that the rest of the way out. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, we got one bolt out. To get better access to the T55, we actually went ahead and removed what's supposed to be a 13mm nut. You can see ours are a bit crusty from the center of the exhaust bracket, just so we can fold this down a little bit and give ourselves some more clearance. So if you're running into some trouble, I recommend you do that. So now we can take our T55, feed it into the head of the bolt. We can lose the socket, we can lose the ratchet. Now we can go ahead and get the bolt out the rest of the way by hand. Beautiful. So you can see we got the arm out, the spacer shim goes with it, so make sure you install your new one with your new arm. Let's go ahead and set this off to the side, grab our new arm, and just mock it up into place for now. All right, with our old arm off, we can go ahead and install our new one, starting with the subframe side. You wanna make sure you install your washer the same way you took it out. The kit comes with a new washer. We'll go ahead and get this roughly into place. Try not to drop the washer. And then we're gonna feed our bolt in with our eccentric washer. This is gonna be used at the alignment shops. You wanna make sure you put that back in. Obviously, it goes without saying you're gonna need an alignment after doing this job. One, just due to the fact that we're messing with the alignment, and two, you have a bunch of fresh bushings, a bunch of fresh new bushings, so they're gonna all sit a little bit differently than the old tired ones did. You have a floating bracket on the inside of the subframe, so you wanna make sure that both bolts grab before you snug one or the other down all the way. Good. All right, we're gonna get our second bolt started. All right. All right, we have both bolts loosely started. While we have plenty of play in it, we're gonna go ahead and feed our bolt in up at the wheel carrier. To help prevent against galvanic corrosion, we're gonna go ahead and apply a little bit of liquid moly ceramic paste to the shoulder of the bolt, not on the threads. That way when it sits in the control arm, it has a fighting chance at not seizing itself in there in the long run. So the next time someone gets in here, they have an easy time doing this job. We got our new nut on the other end. And that is going to stay loose until the very end when we tighten everything at right height. But for the inboard side on the axle carrier, we can go ahead and snug those down. We're going to start with our work in the reverse order. We're going to start with the outside and then work our way in. So we're going to grab our T55, snug it down all the way. Next, we'll grab our E14 and we'll snug that one down all the way as well. And then we're going to torque both of them down to 70 Newton meters. There's our E14, and now we have our T55. Beautiful. Now with the inboard portion of that arm situated, we can go ahead and put our exhaust back into place. I'm just gonna make sure it goes up the same way we had it. Feed it back into our hanger. Get our nut started. We'll make sure our tip looks proper, and then we can go ahead and snug this down. Again, this should be a 13. Ours were pretty rusted away, so a 12 millimeter was hammered on there. All right, nice and snug. And there we go. Now with that situated, let's head over to the front half of things. We're gonna work on removing the shield, and then we'll work on our forward arm. All right, my good people, next, we're gonna move to the forward arm. But before we do that, we want to remove the shield so that we can access the hardware there more easily. It is held on by 6 plastic 10 millimeter nuts. We're going to zap all 6 off and just drop this. You could argue that you can do just the front too and fold it over a little bit. But 10 millimeter on the electric ratchet, we'll make quick work of it. Just remember, when you put this back together, the rear shield that we're pulling off sits underneath the more forward one. See how they're tucked inside each other? They really only go one way, but sometimes it's easy to mix those up. So we're gonna pull the forward shield down. So you can see our lift arm is pinching our shield in. We're gonna go ahead and lift this off for a second. We'll pull the thing off and we'll pick right back up at the arm. Next, in order to be able to get the hardware out for this lower forward arm, we have to remove one of the subframe bolts and washers. So we're gonna grab our E18 on our impact. We're gonna zap this one out. As you can see, the washer is keyed. It only goes on one way. However, the keys are the same on both ears. So what I'm gonna do, just so we remember to put it back the same way, is I'll put a blue mark on one side and I'll mark the same ear. So when we put it back together, it's going in the same orientation. Next, we're gonna grab our M14 bit and a 21mm socket or wrench, whichever one we can fit on there better, to counterhold, and we'll work on freeing up this hardware. It's a little bit tight, so I'm using my M14 with a small adapter to my 3/8. For now, we're just gonna work on breaking it free. I'll use a wrench to give myself some extra leverage here and just go gently. So we can go. All right, now we need a counter hold. So the whole thing is spinning. We'll pop this cable out of its bracket here so we can get some more flexibility in here. All right, we're gonna leave that bolt in there for now, as this arm is gonna be under a bit of tension. We don't want it to slap out and hit somebody or ourselves. That'll stay there. Now let's work on the carrier side of things. For this lower one, I'm gonna use the impact gun since I can squeeze it in there, make life a little bit easier. Again, M14 and 21mm nut, using a wrench to counterhold on the other side. And we can pull this upper bolt off. Beautiful. I'm gonna go ahead and grab our new arm, and then we're gonna transfer over this protective plastic shielding, and then we'll install the new one. To get this plastic shielding off, you have two tabs you want to unlock. One is on the inboard, one is on the outboard. You kind of want to just squeeze the plastic in and pry it off with a flathead or a small pick, whatever you have handy. There's one. There's two. Pop it off the old arm. And go ahead and pop in your new one. And just fold them over and lock it. And now we can go ahead and feed the subframe side in first. Now, before I send that bolt all the way through, I'm gonna add a little bit of the liquid moly ceramic paste so there's no galvanic corrosion that causes this bolt to be seized in there in the long run. We're gonna do this to pretty much all the hardware that we can. Just a little dab will do you. Then we'll start one of our new nuts on the other end. And then we'll do the same thing down here. Give me back my glove. All right, same thing, a little bit of liquid moly on there, on that last bit. Then we'll start a new nut on the other side. All right, and we're gonna leave those loose again until the very end when we tighten everything at ride height. All right, my good people, at this point we have both of our lower arms installed. Now with everything loosely on there, we can go ahead and set the vehicle to ride height. Per Mercedes, they want to see your axle to be horizontal. So we're going to try to do our best to get to that point using the screw jack and the lift. If you're working at home, you can use a floor jack and your jack stands. Once we have our ride height set, then we'll go ahead and tighten down both ends on our forward arm and then the carrier end on our rearward arm. So let's go ahead and get the car situated and we'll go from there. Now with our car at ride height, we're gonna go ahead and take our M14 and start on the carrier side of things with the rearward arm. We'll go ahead and snug it down the rest of the way. Now we're gonna go ahead and torque this down to 80 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. All right, we'll make a little mark with our paint pen and then we'll clock the bolt another 90 degrees. All right, and we'll mark it against the arm, just so we know that it doesn't come loose down the road. Now we're gonna go ahead and do the same thing up at our subframe. We'll squeeze our electric ratchet in here just to snug it up quickly. Counter hold with a 21mm wrench, M14. And now we can go ahead and torque this one down to 80 Newton meters as well. Just note, it gets a little tricky to grab onto this nut because of the plastic bracket that sits on it. And then getting your M14 to stay in there at the same time can be a little bit of a handful. Now the trick is going to be to kind of hold that nut while we hit the bolt with another 90 degrees. I'm going to ask my friend Mike to counter hold here for me so that we can get an accurate measure here. Beautiful. Now for our rearward arm, we're gonna go ahead and grab our 10mm hex, our 18mm wrench, snug them down, and then we'll torque it up. 18mm to counter hold. Then this last one, we're gonna tighten down to 40 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. All right. We'll make a little mark on the bolt and we'll clock it 90 degrees. Beautiful. Now we can go ahead and hit it with paint mark just so we can track that later on. And while we still have the support of the screw jack, we're gonna go ahead and reinstall our subframe bolt. So let's go ahead and do that. Don't forget to reinstall your line if you unclipped it earlier like we did, back into its bracket. Now we can take our washer. Remember we marked those ears before. We can go ahead and feed it back into place. And then we can take our bolt And our E18 socket, I have it on a 5-inch extension. We're gonna start it by hand. Once we have some thread started, we can go ahead and snug it up with the impact. And now, we're gonna wanna torque it down to 90 Newton meters plus 60 degrees. There's 90. I'll give myself a little paint mark. And we'll rotate that roughly 60 degrees. And we'll hit it with a mark. And now we can go ahead and reinstall our plastic shielding. Don't forget to feed the forward end underneath the other shield. Again, 6 10mm plastic nuts. We're just gonna go ahead and zap them on with the electric ratchet. All right. Last but not least, we're gonna get the car at eye level. We'll slap our wheel back on, get it on the ground, and torque it up. And now, my good people, we're gonna go ahead and throw our wheel on, grab our 17mm lug bolt socket. We'll get them all started by hand, and then we'll drop it down and torque them up. All right, let's snug them up with our impact. Now we'll go ahead and drop her down. Now we can go ahead and torque our bolts down, do it in the star pattern. Again, we're gonna torque these down to 135 Newton meters or 100 foot-pounds. And there you have it, my good people, another DIY in the books. Overall, a pretty straightforward job on this W211. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, or there's specific content that you want to see be done on this vehicle, you know where to drop it in the comment box below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.